Okay, new set, new PowerPoint, but this one's a little different. This is Magic the Gathering Foundations. It's not a core set, it's a super core set. It's going to last in standard for 5 years. These cards are very much standard power level, so this is going to be much less impactful to modern, I think, than the average standard set we've been seeing over the last few years. That being said, we got some sweet ones to talk about. Kiora the Rising Tide is a really interesting card to me. It's a 3 mana 3/2. When it enters the battlefield, you draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards, and then when it attacks, if there are 7 or more cards in your graveyard, you may make an 8/8 blue octopus creature token. Now, combining this with the draw 2, discard 2, combining this with fetch lands, combining this with cards like Malevolent Rumble, Dragon Rage's Channeler, Mishra's Bauble, fetch lands, I think that threshold on turn 3 is going to be pretty easy to meet. It would not be so easy to meet without the draw 2, discard 2, but I think you're going to be pretty consistently having it immediately on turn 3. Now, these kind of 3 mana creatures that need to attack to pop off are not the kind of cards I really liked very much before Modern Horizons 3, but now we have Arena of Glory and Detective's Phoenix, 2 incredible haste enablers. Notably, you can discard Detective's Phoenix and get a little bit of card advantage with Kiora. 2 incredible haste enablers to just turn this into 3 mana, 3 mana haste, 11 power on the board, and you got to Faithful Saluting too. Very powerful. I think this card is very comparable to Omnivorous Flytrap, a card that we've been doing very well with in the Jund Delirium deck. We top forward Modern Challenge with it. I would recommend that deck a lot. But both are pretty similar. They come down, they have ETBs. Flytrap only triggers if you have Delirium. Kiora triggers all the time. Kind of makes it better against Graveyard Hate, but whatever. And then when you attack, you get an extra trigger. And so Kiora with the attack is 11 power. With a Faithful Suiting, Flytrap is 6 power. All of it's attacking. The 8/8 isn't attacking like Kiora is, but it's 6 power or 14 power if you have 6 types. Very comparable. The fact that Kiora is in blue makes me think that I would want to play this in a aggressive Izzet deck with Murktide Regent, with Fear of Missing Out, with Arena of Glory, with Detective's Phoenix. There have been some lists popping around. I would want to start it in that shell. But I think Kiora is going to be a pretty good option in these kind of decks. I've been playing these kind of decks a lot, and I'm excited to get a new toy for them. So I think Leyline Axe has the potential to create an entirely new viable modern deck. So Leyline Axe is the first ever artifact Leyline. If it's in your opening hand, you can just put it into play just like Leyline, or you can spend 4 mana for it. This is an equipment, and it says you can equip it for 3 mana to give a creature +1/+1, double strike trample. Now this pairs absurdly well with Metalwork Colossus. I almost feel like it was just designed for Metalwork Colossus, where not only does it discount a Colossus by 4, and in combination with Signets, other affinity cards, other ley lines, Serum Powder, you can cast this very cheaply as soon as turn 1, sometimes turn 2, oftentimes turn 3, I think, and then you can equip your axe to your Colossus and just attack for 22 trample. And at least in the formats I like to play, players start with 20 life, which is very convenient to attack for 22 trample in these 20 life formats. So I'm pretty optimistic about this. There's a lot of different ways you can build this. I think you're either going to do completely colorless, and you can be really in on Urza Saga, Sanctum of Ugin. Make sure to play your Lava Spur Boots, Ugin's Labyrinth, so you can imprint your Colossus, buy it back later. Or maybe you'll splash blue and you'll play like Kappa Cannoneer, Metallic Rebuke, be a little bit slower, a little bit like have more plan Bs. We'll see. That being said, I think this might be like the first good like Serum Powder deck in Modern's history. Serum Powder, not much of a modern card, but if it's in your opening hand, you can exile all the cards from your hand and like kind of get a free mulligan. It's a little bit wonky with the London Mulligan. I don't want to get too into it, but it helps you dig for your combo. And it's also a 3 mana non-creature artifact that kind of discounts your Colossus by 4 also. And so, like, the fact that it, like, has synergy with your plan in addition to being a good mulligan tool, I think this will actually be a very good Serum Powder deck, which to me is kind of exciting. Also worth noting, Leyline Axe kind of combos with Fervent Champion. Everybody's favorite world champ, Fervent Champion, is a 1 mana 1/1 first strike haste, makes equipment cost 3 less. So if you have Leyline Axe, you play Fervent Champ, you have a 2/2 double strike trampler getting in that potentially you're going to make bigger. I don't think that that's going to be super good, if I'm going to be quite honest. I'm not like the most optimistic for the old Fervent Champion deck. That being said, I have a ton of Fervent Champion trophies in Modern, and maybe if we get like a good 2 mana equipment that we could go like this turn 1, turn 2, slap it on the champ, get in, maybe we could see something happening. So I've kind of been predicting that Wizards would be very reluctant to print more 7 mana colorless Eldrazi. I kind of thought it would be a year, 2 years before we saw another one. Nope. here in Foundations, we're getting a pretty interesting one. This is Sire of the Seven Depths. This is a 7 mana, 7/7 with 7 abilities. First Strike, Vigilance, Menace, Trample, Reach, Lifelink, Ward, pay 7 life. Kind of simply put, this is another Ugin's Labyrinth an imprintable, and it's an option in your Eldrazi decks. What's very funny is if this card was Sire of the Six Depths, and you made it a 6 mana 6/6, and you removed the worst ability on this, maybe Reach, maybe First Strike, you remove the worst ability on this, it would be much worse. This card is really only something that we're really super thinking about because it imprints to Ugin's Labyrinth early, and is something you can ramp into on turn 4, turn 3, something you can grab back from your Labyrinth and cast. This card is very similar, I think, to Wormcoil Engine. It's a big life linker that's kind of resilient to removal spells. Ward pay 7 life, I think, is not as good as making 2 tokens, but what's cool about the Ward pay 7 life is, like, the first one, well, the first one, your opponents will probably be able to pay 7 pretty comfortably. The second Sire, it's like, oh, I already paid 7. So I think the second Sire will often get your opponents. Now, I'm having a kind of a hard time thinking exactly how this competes with other big imprintable options. Obviously, there are more than this, but these are kind of some of the generic colorless ones, and this one being kind of more generic, more colorless, makes it kind of comparable. Like, is it better than Devour of Destiny? Destiny gives you a lot of selection. Sire is probably more powerful. Devour gives you some outs to cards like Murktide Regent that otherwise you can have a hard time dealing with, especially game 1. Sire is not that good against Murktide Regent. All Is Dust is very good, but some Utopia Sprawl builds don't like to play them. Breaker is very good at stabilizing and gaining a lot of life. Is Sire better at doing that? Sire is also 1 less mana, which is really critical. Breaker has a cast trigger, so it's like not as good as weak to counter spells. We're gonna have to do some playtesting. It's also notable that Sire has no like colorless requirements. Like, you don't need to spend colorless mana on it. So like, if your opponent plays a moon effect, like, this is a little bit easier to cast, which is something else you have to play into your evaluation. I don't think I'm gonna really know how this card plays until I cast it a few times. But I think in my Eldrazi builds, I will be putting Sire of the Seven Depths into them for a little bit just to see how it plays. Now, I have seen a lot of people talk about pairing this card with, it's not Soul Trader, Soul Flare. Soul Flare, the Delve card that for each card you delve, you get a keyword ability. Notably, you don't get Menace, because Menace wasn't around when that card was printed. Urborg Scavengers is the other version. I don't get too lost in the sauce here, but there are these cards that they exile cards from the graveyard. They get these abilities. This card, people see, ooh, it has a lot of abilities. This must be very good with Soul Flare. Now, I think that there's like basically no chance that that's going to be the case. This card does not have haste. This card does not have double strike. This card does not have hexproof. Those are by far the most important abilities for your Soul Flare decks. I think that there are many better cards to pair with Soul Flare, and Soul Flare is also not viable in Modern. I think you could maybe make it work as a Soul Flare deck if somehow you could fit Ugin's Labyrinth into the shell. I did see one build with Sign of Draco that was trying to do that, which is pretty cool, but don't expect Soul Flare to make a big comeback in Modern or Pioneer or any format because of this card. When Kitsa Otterball Elite got printed, I was pretty excited for it. This is a 2-mana 1/3 Vigilant Prowess. You can loot with it, and you can copy an instant or sorcery spell, but only if Kitsa's power is 3 or greater. I played a lot with Kitsa in like Wizard shells, more controlling shells, some like Basim shells because it's legendary. And the card was always like very close to being good. And, getting Kitsa to 3 power to copy an instant or sorcery wasn't that tough, but the problem was casting 2 spells for Kitsa and then having 2 mana to copy your other spell. That just, honestly, it almost never happened, despite playing probably 30 to 40 matches with Kitsa. Like, it was just pretty rare that you would be able to like effectively trigger copy on a turn. Now, Dragecatcher is kind of a similar card. It says whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you put that amount of damage of incubation counters on it, and you can remove 3 incubation counters at any time to make a 2/2 Drake creature token with flying. So it's similar to Kitsa in that you need to trigger it twice to get some extra value. But unlike Kitsa, you don't need to spend any extra mana. These are both wizards for Flame of Venor, by the way, which is interesting as well. This Dragecatcher doesn't loot like Kitsa does, but it's also not a legend, so you can have multiple copies in play, which I think is kind of interesting. I think that there's a chance that this could be an optimal card to play in Izzet Wizards or Grixis Wizards. Now, Wizards as an archetype is something I think that struggles a lot against Boros energy specifically, and I think a big part of that matchup dynamic is that you just get very behind on board. And so the fact that Drake Hatcher is just going to put creatures into play to trade with your Boros opponent's creatures, I think is kind of interesting. I think it's kind of interesting. I'm not expecting this card to definitely make the cut, but it's definitely one that I'm going to be playtesting. And I think that this card could certainly end up surprising you in a Wizard shell. I don't think that this is a regular prowess card, but I think in Grixis or Is It Wizards, this card could be potentially the missing piece. And in a similar way that like Oculus and Dimir ended up being a really important tool for that matchup because it just puts a bunch of bodies into play and it helps you maintain the board state in those matchups. We also get a new Alesha. This time she's Laughing at Fate. She's a 3 mana, 2/2 first strike. Whenever Alesha attacks, you put a counter on her. And then at the beginning of your end step, if you attack with a creature this turn, you can return target creature with mana value less than or equal to Alesha's power from the graveyard to battlefield. Now, this card, one, works really well with Arena of Glory. I should have put it on the slide, but the ability to Arena of Glory, attack, 3/3, bring something back is pretty cool, even doing that on an empty board. But notably, Alesha does not have to be the creature that's attacking for you to get something back. You can just attack with any other creature and still get back your Ajani, your Ocelot Pride, your Guide of Souls, your Bowmaster. Funny enough, this is another card that I don't think would have been very good pre-MH3, but they just printed, all these crazy energy cards, and Alesha just grabs them back. So quite simply, this card could be an optimal piece of top end in Mardu energy. Maybe after the ring gets banned, maybe right now. We'll definitely be playtesting it. They printed a new, almost strictly better Lava Spike, Bolt Wave, 3 damage to each opponent instead of 3 damage to target player. Notably, this gets around Leyline of Sanctity, which is a little bit of something. Leyline of Sanctity, not that popular in Modern these days. There was a time, I think, when a card like this would have been a pretty big game changer to Modern because it would have been a big buff to burn. This is a big buff to burn, I think. Getting Rift Bolt out of the deck, potentially getting your worst card out of the deck for an upgraded version of Lava Spike is nice. I will need to do some math. I'll need to do some testing. But unless this card gives burn consistent turn 3 kills, which I'm not convinced it does, or I don't think that it does, but we will need to do some math. If this gives this deck consistent turn 3 kills, it's interesting. The big problem for burn in Modern, however, is not just that Boros gains a ton of life, and that's the most popular deck. That is a big problem, of course, but there's also the issue of decks like Storm and Goryo's Vengeance and Titan just having you dead or effectively dead on turn 3, and your deck is just not fast enough to keep up. I don't think Bolt Wave gets there, but if they print something else to help speed up the burn deck, then maybe one day we could get some Goblin Guides back in Modern. Kellen, Planar Trailblazer, is a card I would have been so excited for like 5 years ago. It is a 1 mana 2/1 Human Fairy Scout that has some pretty interesting stats, but kind of what I would be excited for is the ability to play Kellen turn 1, and then Spellstarter Spread on turn 2, and counter your 2-drop on turn 2. Now times have changed, and Orcish Bowmaster exists, and decks are really, really fast, and Galvanic Discharge exists, and these kind of cards are really not it. You have to compete with Ragavan, you have to compete with Channeler. I think there's a small chance this card impresses, and I think there's a small chance they give you one more good like Spellstarter Sprite quality card one day. If that ever happened, then maybe we could be cooking. But Kellen is a 1 mana 2/1, and then it's kind of like a there's so many cards. Frodo, Figure of Destiny, these kind of cards where you spend mana to level them up. So for 2 mana, you can turn Kellen into a creature that says whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you exile the top card of your library, and you can play that card this turn. So it's kind of like Ragavan. You flip a card, you can play it this turn, but you flip from your deck instead of your opponent's, which on average will be better for you, but you don't get a treasure token, and you have to spend 2 mana, which is a lot worse. But for 3 mana, you can turn Kellen into a 3/2 double striker. And then that double strike triggers that first ability, which is pretty powerful. And so I kind of see a play pattern where you can play Kellen turn 1, hold up counter spells, your opponent doesn't play anything, level it up, hold up counter spells, opponent doesn't play anything, level it up, then take over the game. I can see that happening. I don't think it's going to be better than what we have at the moment. I think we are going to need one more Spellstarter Sprite quality card to make this happen. But if just keep your eye out. Keep your eye out. If we could play 8 of these, we'd be so in there. I guess kind of similar to fairies, cats are kind of getting there too. We have Arhabo, the first thing, and also Claws Out. Claws Out is a 5-mana instant, costs 1 less for each cat you control. Creatures you control get +2/+2. Kind of simply, if this was 2 mana, creatures get +2/+2 at instant speed. That is worth considering as like a 1 or 2 of in these kind of decks. Arhabo, I think, is the more interesting card. This is a 3-mana 2/2. Whenever Arhabo or another non-token cat enters, you make a 1/1 cat creature token. Now, I don't think we'd even really be thinking much about this card at all if we didn't just already get a Johnny Nakato Pariah, Ocelot Pride, Kihira as like a companion lord. We got Sunspine Lynx recently. We have Cauldron Familiar. We have Lead and Arbiter. We're kind of getting there. Arbo is like pretty cool too. That the fact that like if your opponent kills it, you have kind of 2-for-1 them, because in theory, a cat token is going to be worth about a card for you, and it has the potential to completely take over a game, making a ton of cats and also making all of your cats really big. I don't think Arhabo is going to be enough by itself, but I think one day we might be able to make a real cat deck in Modern. So Revenge of the Rats is not the kind of card I would usually go over, but it just kind of happens to slot really well into an archetype I've spent a lot of time playing recently. I've been building a lot around Crypt of Agadeem, which is a land that taps for a black mana for each black creature in your graveyard. It's been a lot of fun. It hasn't been super good. We've had some success. And the fact that this is a card you can mill over for value with cards like Overlord of the Baelmerk, with cards like Stitch Your Supplier, Sack Your Supplier, Flash us back on turn 3, I think it's pretty cool. I think one thing I have been looking for in the deck is like a source of card advantage from the graveyard, and this one might be it. It makes a 1/1 tapped black creature token for each creature card in your graveyard. If the rats were untapped, I think I would be really excited. They're tapped, so I'm actually not all that excited, if I'm going to be quite honest. But I will probably give it a go at some point, but there's a chance I might wait for like one more card to get printed for this archetype, because I've just spent so much time. I don't really want to waste too much of y'all's time. Zul Ashar Lichlord may not have been a card on your Modern radar, but I think I like it in the Warren Soul Trader combo decks. If you haven't seen it, Warren Soul Trader is a 3-mana 3/3 that combos with Gravecrawler for infinite cast of Gravecrawler. Then when you're casting and sacking your Gravecrawler, usually win with Apprentice Marionette. You could do Blood Artist though, something like that. And I think this card just kind of fits in the shell of Warren Soul Trader, Gravecrawler, Stitcher Supplier. You can like mill over stuff with Supplier, replay your Supplier, sack it, etc., etc. And what's also cool is that this is an activated ability for Agatha's Soul Cauldron. So is Warren Soul Trader, but the problem is like the more mono black shells, you just don't kind of have enough good things to get back with Cauldron. Zulashar really changes that. You're pretty close. Like Soul Trader and Lichlord are both very good things to Cauldron back. You could maybe play something like Priest of Felrights to complement it, but like I'm pretty optimistic about rebuilding like the mono black Agatha's Soul Cauldron builds with Zulashar. I think that this is kind of going to tie the room together in a really interesting way. So Crystal Barricade is kind of a cool card. It's a 2-mana 0/4 artifact creature. It says you have hexproof, like Leyline of Sanctity. It says prevent all non-combat damage that would be dealt to other creatures you control, like Mark of Asylum. And I think this could be a fun Court of Calling target in combo decks like Yawgmoth that are kind of already splashing white sometimes, where this is going to protect you from combos like Belcher and also going to protect you from stuff like Galvanic Discharge, Lightning Bolt, Flage. The ability to like chord forward in response to a Belcher activation. The Belcher activation fizzles, then they have to Belcher your creature, then Belcher you. I think that that's kind of cool, and I think it's cool that it serves like the double purpose of like that they have to kill this with a 4 energy discharge or static prison it. Otherwise, the bolts and the flages don't do too much. They can't target you. They can't target your creatures either. I think it's a cool option. Probably not one you're going to see a lot of copies of. I think the fact that it is still somewhat fragile is going to be kind of a problem, but it's kind of cool. Maybe one day you'll like get it back with Goblin Engineer. Every time I see a card like this, I think about Goblin Engineer, and I need to stop. Raise the Past is a pretty cool reanimation spell. It's pretty comparable to a card like Return to the Ranks. They both return creatures with mana value 2 or less from the graveyard to the battlefield. Raise the Past gets all of them for 4 mana, and Return to the Ranks gets 1 for each X mana, but you can convoke it out, so you can get a lot of them in play for potentially only 2 white sources. Kind of simply put, I think these cards are pretty fringe playable. I have cast several Return to the Ranks this year, though, and Samwise and Amalia Shells, and I think it's possible Raise the Past could be better. You can I think build more around it with like Stitcher Supplier, Malevolent Rumble, and then like Malevolent Rumble and Phyrexian Tower can let you cast this card on turn 3, which is kind of exciting. um, and bring back a ton of stuff. So we'll definitely try to build builds that are more all in on this than return to the ranks. But I think there's also a pretty good chance you could do like 4-2, 3-2, a split of raise and return, and just kind of see how it goes. Mossborn Hydra is another one of these cards like Kiora, 3 mana, not something to really consider until they printed Arena of Glory, because this card could be pretty crazy. It's a 3 mana 1/1, or I guess it's a 3 mana 0/0 that enters with a counter, and then it has a landfall. Whenever a land you control enters, double the number of counters on this creature. Obviously, these landfall creatures are always way more powerful in fetch land formats. This comes down as a 1/1, you play a fetch land, it's a 2/2, then it's a 4/4, and then getting pretty crazy after that. Now, notably, this with haste can be pretty impressive on turn 4, kind of slow on turn 4 though. But if you're playing it in a Hardened Scales Arena of Glory deck somehow, you could really pop off, making this a 2/2 that turns into a 4/4 that turns into an 8/8, etc., etc. I have been hopeful that one day we could have a non-artifact based Hardened Scales deck. I've tried to build it several times. There are a lot of cool cards that you can play in the shell, but it's been missing stuff for a long time. This card could put you in the right direction, but we're probably still missing a few pieces. Loot Exuberant Explorer is not only the scariest looking Foundations card, but possibly could go in some Primeval Titan builds. It's pretty comparable to Dryad of the Elysian Groves in a lot of way. They're both 3 mana, 4 toughness creatures that let you play an additional land. Dryad of the Elysian Grove is usually a card that combos with Valakut to kill your opponent. Loot is pretty cool because it sticks in play, and then you can spend 6 mana to look at this top 6 cards of your library and put a creature card into play that has mana value less than or equal to the number of lands you control. This ability combos really well with Castle Garenbrig. Castle Garenbrig doesn't only cast creatures, it also activates abilities of creatures. And I will say that I don't think regular Amulet Titan will play this necessarily. I will say Amulet Titan experts will be able to tell you more definitively if this goes in or not. My gut would be that this doesn't make the cut in the current builds. That being said, I have played some Castle Garenbrig Primeval Titan decks in the last year or so, especially in combination with Sunken Citadel. Sunken Citadel, Castle Garenbrig, it's like 4 lands for 6 mana. And I would be interested in playing this in those kind of shells. Although, there is kind of the problem, right, where if you are using Castle Garenbrig to activate loot, and you have less than 6 lands in play, and you activate loot, and you see a Primeval Titan, you can't put it into play unless you have 6 lands. So, I'm not sure about this one. I think loot could potentially be a card that, like, looks kind of innocuous and really impresses, kind of similar to Dryad of the Elysian Grove. Kind of simply put, there are not that many good extra land effects in Modern. There's Dryad, there's Explorer, Azusa is pretty dang fragile. And there's not, the list beyond that is not super extensive. So whenever there's a new extra land card, I think you do want to take a little bit of a closer look at it. So maybe we'll play some loot in Modern and maybe not. And that's about it, I think, for Modern Impact and Foundations. There's some good stuff here, some stuff that I think we'll definitely be playing with for a while. But like I said, this is a set that is designed for standard power level, not as many cards, I think, as sets we've been seeing recently. I'm pretty excited. I'll also say, I've got a standard tournament coming up in January. I'm probably going to try brewing some standard on the channel too. So keep an eye out for that. Thank you for watching. Appreciate you. See you later. Bye.